Good afternoon, everyone. Please remain standing while my chaplain, Father Paul, says prayers.
Yn enw Tad a'r Mab a'r Ysbryd Glân, Amen, Gweddïwn. Let us pray. A prayer of Saint Benedict from the 6th century. O gracious and holy Father, give us the wisdom to perceive you, diligence to seek you, patience to wait for you, eyes to behold you, a heart to meditate upon you, and a life to proclaim you, through the power of the Spirit of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Almighty God, from whom alone comes wisdom and understanding, we ask you to direct aright the minds of those who are about to take counsel together on matters pertaining to the common life of this borough, that in all their deliberations and decisions they may faithfully discharge the duties of their office and ever promote the health, safety, and well-being of those whom they seek to serve, for the honour and glory of your holy name. Amen.
Please be seated. Good afternoon and welcome to this hybrid webcasted meeting of Council at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, the 9th of November 2022. Can I please remind you all to switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting? Please turn your microphones to mute unless you are speaking both in the chamber and remotely. If in the chamber, please use the microphone in front of you when speaking. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams, or if present in the chamber, please raise your hand. If accessing the meeting remotely, please only use the chat function to indicate you wish to speak. I assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the start of the meeting. When speaking, please introduce yourself. I am Robert Wood, Mayor. I have another announcement to make. It's a card we've received back from King Charles III after we sent him a letter of condolence. I'll just read out the verse in it. It was so very kind of you to send me such a wonderful, generous message following the death of my beloved mother. Your most thoughtful words are enormously comforting, and I cannot tell you how deeply they're appreciated at this time of immense sorrow. And that's signed Charles R. Second item on the agenda is members' interests. Are there any interests to declare? Please indicate by raising your hand via Teams, or if present in the chamber, please raise your hand and when called, state details.
Councillor Harvey has his hand up, Chair.
Councillor Mike Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 6, the Neath Talbot Youth Justice and Early Intervention Plan 2022 to 2023. The police are mentioned a number of times in the plan, and I work for South Wales Police. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Got that, Jane?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Move on to agenda item 3, which is minutes of the previous meeting of Council. The minutes of the 25th of May, 13th of July, 12th of September 2022 are on pages 5 to 20. These are here for accuracy only. Can I please have a proposer and seconder, please? If you do not indicate to the contrary, I assume you are happy with the minutes. Can I bring in Jane here, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's apologies, members. There's quite a few attendees of the minutes circulated with the papers that are missing. We seem to have had a little glitch on ModGov, which I apologise for, but it's already started being put correct. So if I can just ask members to confirm the accuracy, subject to us updating all the correct attendees. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jane. Agenda item 4, public question time. I can confirm that we have received no notifications to speak at today's meeting. Before we commence this afternoon's business, I would like to call upon Leader of Council, Councillor Steve Hunt, to address the Council, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Prynawn da, good afternoon, everyone. Over the last week, the authority has faced multiple heavy rainfall events that have unfortunately resulted in instances of flooding. This has brought disruption to many local communities, road users, and in some cases, terrible consequences for the people's properties and livelihoods. Street care personnel in drainage and in neighbourhood services in particular have worked continuously in awful conditions to try and reduce the impact of the bad weather and undertake clean-up operations across the county borough. In particular, on Thursday, the 3rd of November, an extreme weather event passed over Britain Ferry, causing severe flooding on Neath Road and widespread property flooding in the Melyn, Credan. The work by operators to maintain the culvert at St Catherine's Close, one of some 90 critical flood risk assets that staff attend to, were overwhelmed by a deluge of water and debris, which blocked and overspilled the culvert structure, flooding approximately 20 residential properties and 2 businesses. Throughout the night and the early hours of the morning, around 20 council operators cleared the area of debris and helped local residents and businesses get back on their feet as best they could. Over the last 3 days, frontline services have prioritised additional resources to assist and the cleansing operations to help ensure flooding is minimised. Unfortunately, we are all experiencing these intense rainfall events, and they are becoming more common as the county faces the effects of climate change. The existing drainage infrastructure is not designed to cope with the weather we are now experiencing. The council is doing what it can with Welsh Government support, such as a recent construction work to relieve problems at Varteg Road, where properties were being flooded. And hopefully some central support can be made available to assist us going forward. I'm sure all members of council would join me in thanking our workforce for the speed in reacting to such an emergency situation as and when needed. I would finally like to also pay tribute to all the emergency services who work in partnership with us that also respond to such emergencies very quickly to minimise the effects any flooding has on our residents or businesses here in Neath Talbot. I know we have a presentation from Chief Fire Officer Roger Thomas, and I'm sure he can bring you more information on these challenges. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. That brings us to agenda item 5, which is a presentation by the Chief Fire Officer. May I introduce Chief Fire Officer Roger Thomas and their Section 151 Officer Sarah Mansbridge and invite their presentation to Council. Thanks.
Diolch yn fawr i chi, a diolch yn fawr am gwahoddiad i ddod yma heddi a gyflwyno o flaen i chi. So thank you very much for the invitation to come here and present to you today. Real privilege to be here. As the leader said, my name is Roger Thomas. I'm currently Chief Fire Officer of Minnow West Fire and Rescue Service. I've been in post for some 6 months now. It's been an interesting 6 months. And with me is Sarah Mansbridge, who is our interim Section 151 Treasurer. This presentation is part of a 3-stage process. Initially, we start with presentations into our fire authority, and I'll discuss in a little while what the constitution of fire authority and what the reasons behind our approach has been. So the first stage of the process is a series of corporate budget planning days. We've had 3 in total, 1 in July, 1 at the start of September and 1 in the middle of October. To outline initially the current challenges we face, and then moving towards a proposed budget or the levy that we will incur on local authorities for next year. So that's done very much in an open and transparent way, building that, and particularly this year where local government elections have meant a significant change to our local, to our fire authority membership. We have 25 members across the 6 local authorities. Only 9 have returned. So 16 new members, so quite a significant amount of change. Sat next to Alice Llewellyn, a former member, and a number of members who have obviously experienced of fire authority previously. So quite a bit of education piece in terms of getting people up to speed as to what a fire authority does, how it operates, some of the challenges we face, so that they're informed fully in terms of their decision-making process within that, that authority. It is a legal entity in its own right, and I'll come on to some of the budgetary issues that are raised, or the combination order which funds our fire and rescue service within this area. The second part of the process was to meet with treasurers. I met with all 6 treasurers. Hugh Jones is here today, and he met with us. Ben is Swansea, isn't he? Yeah. We met with all 6 treasurers collectively with the executive team to go through some of the challenges and what our potential budget pressures would be for this year. So again, extending that open, transparent, and honest conversation. And the third part of that process then is to meet all local authorities as well. Whilst the authority itself, the fire authority, makes the decision around the budget, I felt is only right and proper. We came in front of each of the local authorities to outline the challenges and pressures on us, and some of the pressures and the budgetary constraints that we face going forward. This is the 4th of 6. So I did Carmarthenshire this morning. I've previously done Swansea last week and Ceredigion before that. And in a week or two's time, we have Pembrokeshire and Powys just to finish off, which means that between the last corporate budget planning day, so members are fully sighted on where we are from a budgetary perspective, we are putting these presentations in place to ensure that you have the opportunity as well as members, as local members, to ask any questions, and I can provide any clarity along with Sarah Mansbridge, our 151 officer. Okay, I'm hoping the technology will be with me. Good, okay, always a worry. Okay, just a little bit about the Fire and Rescue Authority. Mid and West Wales Fire Authority covers 6 local authority areas, as you can see at the top. So Neath, Talbot, Swansea, Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire, Ceredigion and Powys. It covers some 12,000 square kilometres in terms of land mass. And you will appreciate then different challenges throughout that area in terms of local risks. So particularly in this area, in the Neath, Talbot and Swansea areas, significant amount of dense urban population. This area in particular, heavy risks, coma sites. Think of Tata Steel, control of major accident hazard as coma sites in this area. Further down west then towards Pembrokeshire, you think of the energy providers within that area as well. So significant risks in certain parts of our area. As you go through and out of Swansea, Neath, Talbot towards Carmarthenshire, again, some areas of reasonably large population, Carmarthen, Llanelli, Ammanford, some areas of social deprivation. And as we go north then into Powys and Ceredigion, more rural, remote areas, and some of the challenges we've got in obviously in terms of keeping our local fire and rescue service active in that area. We employ some 1,300 staff. Over half of that, some 700 are retained. I'll use that phrase quite a bit through the presentation. Retained means that they are on call. Their primary employment is elsewhere. So they will work in a whole range of different industries, maybe self-employed as plumbers, carpenters, builders, may work in retail, work in schools, hospitals and the like. We have a whole range of areas that they may engage in within their primary employment. The retained element of that relates to the word retainer, which means that we pay them a small retainer. It's not a lot of money, I'm afraid, and they offer for us up to 120 hours of availability a week. Need that sink in a little bit. That means they need to be within 5 minutes of a local station to respond on a pager to an incident should it happen. So you can just imagine the sort of the challenges on the individuals, and I'll talk about that as being the principal challenge that we face as a fire and rescue service as we go through the presentation. So some other facts and figures within that first slide. We cover some 40,000 non-domestic premises. So these are commercial premises. So again, hospitals, care homes, schools, retail outlets, small industrial units, you name it. Anybody would pay non-domestic rates into yourselves as a local authority. And we have statutory responsibility for protection. So under the building safety legislation, the RRO, the Regulatory Reform Order, which covers legislation in that area, which we are duty bound to enforce and statutorily obliged to enforce. We cover some 430,000 households. And whilst we have no statutory duty to enter people's homes, we do offer free home fire safety checks to our communities. Those are risk-based. So we look to do in our most vulnerable, deprived communities first and foremost, because there is a direct correlation between social deprivation and the incidence of fire. So we try and make that risk-based in everything we do, as we do with our commercial premises. We go to those high-risk sleeping risks in the main initially, and then we work back from that in terms of our staged and programmed audit schedule. And some 913,000 people that cover within Mid and West Wales Fire and Rescue Service area. That naturally will swell in certain parts of the year in terms of tourism and also individuals travelling across the area as well. Say next slide is me pushing the button. So, okay. In terms of the different models that we provide, so I'll go from the top really. We do provide a 24/7 full-time. Sorry, the slide is a little bit small and a bit busy, but hopefully, if you can just make out the color coding is the most key element of that. So if you see the red stations down there, and the red stations will be even if partially red. So within this area, I'll make reference, obviously, because there'll be areas that you will understand and relate to. So Neath and Talbot are 24-hour crewed station, primary crewed. So crews are on those stations, either training, exercising, or out in the communities, delivering home fire safety checks, education visits, inspecting premises and the like. So they are there on hand 24/7, 365 days a year. Pontardawe, then station 56, you'll see there is in the orange, sort of burnt orange colour, and that's a day crewed station. So they are their primary crewed in the day, 8:30 to 5:30 at night, and then they will respond on a pager at night. So there'll be a slight delay for them coming into the station before they're mobilised. I'd forget the green for now because there's two volunteer stations. One is on Caldy Island and the other up is in Borth, north of Aberystwyth. We have no contractual arrangements with those stations, and we have no real call on them. They are there literally to supplement incidents in those areas. The sea of blue you will see there are our on-call stations. They are wholly retained. As I said, they respond up to 120 hours a week for a small retainer. They get a duty, a drill night, of 3 hours a week, which are positive hours, to do their training, normal station admin, and keep up to date on things. So, as you can see, Mid and West Wales is essentially an on-call or retained service backed up with whole time. You go to London, there are no retained stations in London or Greater Manchester or Merseyside in the large metropolitans. We are a very different business model. We match our resources to the risk out there. We are wholly dependent on these blue stations, these retained stations, in terms of our operational response. And you can see from there that those are littered around in and around this area as well. So, for instance, we have Amman Valley, we have Neath, we have Seven Sisters and Cymer. And there's also a retained unit within Talbot. So Talbot has two frontline appliances. One is whole time and one is retained or on-call. And there are significant challenges, particularly in this area, and I'll come on to that in terms of the pressures we feel in this area as well. Just to highlight some of the operational challenges that we face. So the top left will be, your standard, but perhaps what you would associate with a modern fire and rescue service, dealing with significant fires in and around our communities. That's a picture there from Aberystwyth as it stands, the Belgrave Hotel. We saved some 12 people from that fire, but there was one loss of life and tragic loss of life in there. So, and you can see the amount and the volume of appliances mobilised to a significant incident like that. And they'd be from across the service as well. So whilst, I know your primary area of concern, and rightly so, is for Neath and Talbot, you have the call across the service to bring resources in from wherever that might come. So significant incidents will draw resources from across the service area and on occasion across our boundaries with South Wales and other fire and rescue services. They will keep pushing down and support any major incident. In the middle there is the tragic picture of Grenfell, happened over 5 years ago, and we are still seeing now the effects of that in terms of the impact on our legislation, the pressure on us now, and the changing legislation in the building safety arena, and the volume of buildings that are now coming in scope for us to inspect and audit and ensure safety of all. And I appreciate there are buildings in this area that are of concern. Top right there is our emergency medical response. We do respond, and we have a number of co-responder stations that do go out to assist the Welsh Ambulance Service. It'll be no surprise to you that the pressure that the Welsh Ambulance Service is currently under and has been for some time in terms of responding to incidents, the delays in terms of getting out to respond to medical calls. We are able to assist in that space in some small fashion. So we go to out-of-hospital cardiac arrest calls, so RED calls, hands-on-chest calls, to support the Welsh Ambulance Service if we are the nearest asset to that incident. That's the only service that we provide that what I would call is non-statutory. However, we do have cost recovery for it, so it is no cost to the service. Well, Welsh Ambulance Service Trust reimburse us for the cost of going to those calls. So it is cost neutral and a significant assistance to our colleagues in the Welsh Ambulance Service who are under significant pressure, as you can appreciate. We also have a number of stations that go out to non-injured fallers. Now, a non-injured faller would be what they call a green call within the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust. There is no time allocated to responding to those incidents. Individuals could be, and in some sad cases have been, literally stranded for hours and hours and hours on at a time. So we have a resource available to be able to assist in that space as well. Bottom left and then bottom middle, and I appreciate we've made references here to the significant flooding that you've experienced in the Neath Talbot area recently. Those are both aligned to climate change. Climate change, I think, for many years was something we talked about. It is very real now. It is very, very close to us. It is happening. The unpredictability of our weather patterns, whether that be severe spate issues in terms of flooding, rainfall, but also long, dry, hot periods, which contribute to significant issues in terms of wildfire as well. Just this year, back in July, you'll recall on the national news, some 14 fire and rescue services across England declared major incidents in terms of attending grass fires. London declared it as the busiest day they'd had since World War II. So this is coming. This is coming, and coming very, very quickly. And finally, then, another sort of disturbing element, I suppose, in changing in society from our perspective. The individuals who've got dressed in purple there are fire and rescue service wearing ballistic wear. We have a capacity and a capability to respond to MTA, marauding terrorist attacks. So the likes of the Borough Market, if you recall, Charlie Hebdo in Paris, that type of attack. So we do have a capability, a capacity and training to respond and assist other emergency services in what they call the warm zone. Warm only in the fact that it is deemed to be relatively safe, and I'll put that in a very changing dynamic situation. It's very difficult to call that safe in any way, shape or form, hence the ballistic wear as well. So, okay, some of the changes, and Sarah will paint these out in in graphical form in a moment in terms of the budgets that are changing budgets over the last 10 to 15 years. So where we were some 20 years ago, certainly higher establishment figures, more 24-hour day crude station. For instance, Pontedower station was a 24-hour crude station at that time, some 20 years ago. Greater numbers of middle managers, business fire safety in particular. We had some nucleus crude stations, which are now wholly retained or on-call stations. And we had primary crude special appliances, most notably at Morriston, where we had a turntable ladder, an aerial appliance. That is now switch crude. So where are we now? Well, a significant drop in terms of our whole-time establishment. The figure you got there is firefighters alone, so some 80-odd firefighters, fewer than we had at that time. Shift changes on whole-time stations. We've taken our complemented stations. So if I go back to my own experiences, when I joined Morriston Fire Station as a raw recruit back in 1996, there were 4 watches of 14, so 56. There are now 24 on that station, so a reduction of 32. At Netley, there were 4 watches of 10. It's now down to 6. Every whole-time station has seen sort of similar reductions in numbers. We are as lean as we could possibly be in terms of the model we're trying to provide. I'll be presented to Powys very shortly. There are no whole-time firefighters in Powys. It is only retained. And you'll see as well, in terms of our on-call strength, so I mean, in terms of the number of people we employ currently, is under 600 against an establishment of 700. So we are over 100 individuals shy of our retained. So hence, the next slide will show you some of the challenges we've got in maintaining availability. And the final bit about aging building stock, and that'll be a common thread with yourselves in terms of moving toward net zero carbon in 2030 and the challenges we've got to ensure that our premises are working towards that target. Okay, on-call availability. The red line shows the service area. So across the whole 6, you will see a steady decline with a notable blip around 2020-21. I don't need to tell you what that is. That was the COVID year. We had a lot of people furloughed, working from home, and as happened, our availability increased. We had more availability. People were either not working or were able to respond from their home addresses. They weren't going out and working out in communities. So we saw quite a significant rise in that period. Taking that out, and if you follow that trend line down, it's worrying for the service. So we've seen a drop off of 12% over the last 7 years. That will continue to decline unless we start to address and stem the flow. Neath Talbot is a huge concern for me. As you can see, we are now down to 60% availability for our on-call, our retained stations. There are periods within this authority where we have stations off the run for days at a time. That is unsustainable going forward. And this is the rhetoric that I played out to Fire Authority. We cannot continue on this course of action because this line will continue to go down. Some of the issues, and I've said about the pressures that we put on individuals, like I say, up to 120 hours a week of availability. COVID has accelerated this in terms of the work-life balance. People are making choices, life choices. They don't want to be tied to a pager within 5 minutes of their station anymore. We're seeing that played out across our service area. It's not unique to us. This happens across every fire and rescue service across the United Kingdom. So it's not unique to us by any means. We're seeing a generation coming through who simply don't want to do it. The ask from us is too much. So sociological changes is impacted on our operational response in an unprecedented way and a continuing way as well. Okay, before I bring Sarah in, I'll just make some reference to the, as I stated earlier, the Fire Authority is made up of 25 members from 6 local authority areas. They are a legal entity in their own right. And in terms of the budget setting, they have within, I wouldn't say their gift, but their authority to levy. So we have no revenue raising powers as a fire authority or a fire and rescue service. We have no means to raise council tax or to find any of our budget other than through the levy that we levy on local authorities every year. Sarah will go through in terms of what that levy graph has played out in the last few years, the last 10, 15 years. But our only means of raising income is through local authorities. And the legislation there outlines what we are able to do as a fire and rescue authority. I hope you'll see through Sarah's presentation that we've been, over the last 10 to 15 years, extremely prudent and mindful of that. And the authority have certainly ensured that local authorities, we haven't exploited or used that legislation in our favour by any means. In fact, quite the opposite, I hope will come through in the presentation. So I'll stop there at that point. That's sort of halfway through. Sarah will take you through the financial elements then in terms of budget setting and some of the historical figures of that. So happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you, Roger. So it's a little bit of a bleak picture that Roger has painted there with regard to our availability, both on the whole time resilience and the on-call resilience. And unfortunately, that bleak picture then is mirrored into the finances that we're now faced with. And as Roger said, we are limited very much to the levy. That we've got very little opportunity to raise fees and charges. So basically everything we get comes from the local authorities. The local authorities receive the bulk of their funding from the revenue support grant from Welsh Government, as you know, and within that there's an element for fire, and then the difference would be picked up through the council tax. So this graph just shows the total revenue budget for Mid and West Wales Fire Authority in 22-23. And as you can see at the top there, our budget is just over 53.8 million. And that's 53.8 million across 6 local authorities. So if you compare that to the 6 local authority budgets, if you add them all together, the revenue budgets for yourself, Swansea, Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, etc., it's in comparison to a budget of just over 2 billion. We actually only represent 2.65% of that 2 billion. That's how much that is spent on fire, a very, very small proportion. And Neath Talbot, as you can see from the graph there, has a levy of 8.513 million. And the levy is calculated based on population. So the population across the whole of the Mid and West area, we take the levy, we divide it by the population, and that then is multiplied out to give the levy. So everybody's levy is based on the same calculation. If I go back to that 2 billion that I was talking about, the amount that comes through that your budgets then you raise through council tax is approximately 27%. And if we were to work that through into the levy, it's only 12% that we ask for from council tax, and the rest is coming through the revenue support grant. So we obviously have to demonstrate that we are value for money. And we do that in the same way as your authorities, that we look at spending less on the inputs while we try to maintain the quality, efficient use, using the minimum number of inputs to achieve the maximum output, and the effectiveness. So we evaluate, we consider to the extent of the outputs that we've generated, how they've actually, have they achieved the outcomes that we set out to achieve. And we also look at what does it mean to the person on the street? How much does it actually cost everybody to have access to this service? And this graph shows that the cost to every person within the Mid and West area is £4.91 per month. So just under £59 a year per person for the fire and rescue service, for a service that's going to give you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We will turn out effectively the Mid and West Wales Fire Service is an insurance policy. It's an emergency response. We will come out regardless of the time of day, and everybody has the access to the same service. But this graph shows us where Roger was referring to how we had actually cut our service over a number of years. It takes you all the way back to 2006-07. So there's three things in this graph. The top line, the 51.99%, is local authority budgets. The middle line, the 46%, relates to cumulative CPI over the period. And unfortunately for me, the bottom line relates to Mid and West Wales Fire. But the reason for going back so far is to show that even pre-austerity, the fire service was making cuts. And this goes back to Roger when he said that we'd cut the number of frontline firefighters, that we'd changed our crewing models, etc. And we've maintained those numbers now for a number of years. But the challenges that we're faced with are changing as well. So we've now got to think about what we need to change to address those new challenges. So the local authority settlements there, 52%, notwithstanding, this is come from Welsh Government, and I'll caveat that because I know within that funding that you've been, there's funding for education, social care, etc. But if you just focus on that difference, every year we have been below local authority settlements and we've been below CPI. And if you just look at the 22-23, the difference there between 46% and 33%, if we'd kept pace with inflation, we'd have an extra £5 million in our budget. And that is year on year, we've been experiencing that underfunding. Wrong one. I've got too many buttons, sorry. So that takes us on to where we are now with our budget planning for 23-24. As Roger said, we are at a critical point now. And if we don't do something, if we don't invest in our on-call, if we don't invest in our frontline resilience, the service is going to be affected and it will be a negative impact on the service we provide. We did our medium-term financial strategy back in September. And at that point, we advised the members of the Fire Authority that the increase in the levy would range from 8 to 17%. We went away, we did some further work, further analysis on that budget requirement, looked very critically at pay awards, expectations, inflation, etc. And we've reviewed that and resulted in a narrowing of the range from 9% to 13%. If we went for a 9% pay award, sorry, a 9% increase in our levy, it would only provide us with the bare minimum to cover a minimum pay and prices inflation. It would be the bare minimum required for a standstill budget, which would only allow us very limited investment in the priority areas that we've highlighted this afternoon. As the Chief has said, our on-call availability is declining, and a standstill budget would mean we'd be unable to invest in this area and stop further decline. And similarly, with no additional funding, we wouldn't be able to address our whole time issues, particularly specialist capability and crewing of our specialist assets. With the 13% levy, we feel that we would be able to address some of these priority areas and ensure that and give some assurance that we would be able to prevent a degradation of service across our communities. The 13% for Neath and Port Talbot Council would represent an increase in levy of 1.118 million. The majority of that would obviously come from 88% of that, if we worked on that figure again, the majority of it would come through the revenue support grant, so the impact on council tax would be minimal. The 13% cost per person would rise from £7.50 to approximately £66.50 a year. So the sums, when you break them down, the figures are relatively small. So I'll leave you with that, and I'm sure you will have questions for us. and we'd be happy to try and respond. Thank you.
Are there any questions there for Sarah Mansbridge on the budget? Councillor Simon Noyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, shall I stand, because I want to direct my questions across to you, and you're directly opposite me, so it may be better rather than facing this way that I face you, if that's okay. Thank you, Roger and Sarah, for your presentations today. For some of us who've been members for 5 years previously, we've seen similar presentations from you, and understand the pressures that you're facing. In terms of Neath Talbot, as well as the Fire Authority, we're all facing crisis in terms of our budgets. Welsh Government and the UK Government indicating to us at present that there is no additional funding. And like you, I guess, although you haven't identified it to us yet, and that'll be what I'll come on to, we are having to find savings and potential cuts to services, both discretionary and statutory. And that's just in order to balance the budget. Now, I think it's widely recognised that the fire service being an essential emergency service and something that we rely on from you, of course. For some members who are not fully clued up on it, as you've explained, it is a levy that you take, and that the amount of levy that you take, as you said, a lot of it is covered by the RSG, and the balance of it is covered by council taxpayers. Now, for us in the year 22-23, the standard spending assessment was 7.46 million, whereas the levy was 8.5 million. So that was just over £1 million that had to come out directly out of council taxpayers. I think my questions to you are, can you explain, please, what the authority are doing to mitigate any increases in the, I had some figures here of 8 to 17%. I think you've updated those recently to take into account some changes, and 9 to 13% is what you're looking at in an increase, and 1.18 million, which obviously is going to have an impact on our internal cost base from the Talbot. What are you doing then, therefore, to mitigate those increases? And what changes, if any, can you do to your service in order to change the way in which you operate, but meeting the demands of what we require from you as a service? Neath Talbot, I should have explained at the start, I'm cabinet member for finance. Didn't explain that, sorry, my apologies. We are looking at the minute at various many things that we need to do in terms of cuts, savings, and the like. You know, nothing is off the table is the phrase that we're using at the minute. Can you tell us what you're looking at? Because clearly, you, as well as us, we cannot go on in the way we are. We are facing cuts. If we're all facing cuts and there are increases, how can we mitigate what we're going to anticipate coming through? I may have a comeback question after you, if that's okay, based on what you come back with. Is that okay? Thank you.
Okay, I'll start off then. Thank you for the question, Councillor. We appreciate it. And yeah, I worked out you were the cabinet member for. I think I'll bring Sarah in terms of the particular aspects of that. You're right. When we first presented to the treasurers, there was this between 8 and 17% where we were looking at. That is revised now. We've gone back to that to bring in between a smaller band of 9 to 13%. Our view, and Sarah's articulated that, I think 9%, that steady. I should have said at the start. Excuse me. That 9% means that everything I've given you and everything Sarah's given you is factual, is all evidence-based, is all data-driven. We've had all that. It is, you know, non-contestable in that they are fact. The only element I can give you on a professional judgment with that line you saw of 60% availability for on-call availability within the Neath Talbot area and 83% across the service area, that will, in my professional view, will continue to decline if we stay at 9%. It is quite as stark as that. So we are looking at a service we'll be paying for but not getting, because you keep on paying for people if they're not available. If we have some people available at the station but not enough to get an appliance out, we are still paying for that. You mentioned statutory and discretion. We have no discretionary services. It is all statutory. The only element of discretion in there was that, as I mentioned, the emergency medical response. So, and that is cost neutral, as in we are remunerated and on a cost recovery basis for that. So everything we do is statutory. Statutory in the sense, and I do it, you know, statutory isn't a finite position. There is clearly, you know, a buffer between what you do provide, what you can provide, and what, you know, you could strip it back. In terms of our the pressures on us from a budgetary perspective, I think I'm right in saying around about 80% of our budgets are 75, sorry, is salary based. We have no capital funding. All of our capital is funded through revenue, so minimum revenue, MRP, minimum revenue provision. So we have to, our capital program comes out of our revenue budget and not separately funded. And hence it would mean jobs, essentially. When you've got an on-call service that is creaking and unavailable, you are then reliant on, in this area. So for instance, and I'll make it, you know, relevant to the area that members cover here. If you're Neath, the Seven Sisters stations are off the run, it would mean Neath going up the valley. If Cymru is off the run, Talbot are going up the valley. If we reduced those, and that's where we could get some money from potentially, is taking out further firefighters, closing a station. You could do it. It is extremely painful. You know, let's be frank about it. We can do it. We could do anything. You know, we could put one fire station in the middle of Neath Talbot and say we're meeting our statutory duty. You know, I don't think that would be appropriate. I don't think that would be me matching resources to risk, and I would, you know, advise members against anything down that route. When we've got such heavy reliance on our primary, our whole-time stations backing up our retained, and a reducing availability in those stations, I would guard against taking any further steps of reducing availability there. Some years ago, we changed Pontedower from a 24-hour crewed station, so a 4-watch day-night station, first of all into what they call a self-rostered crewing model, which was then fought by the unions, and we had to withdraw from that position. It is now day crewed. So you could say in the area of Pontedower, we have increased risk for those individuals at night. Ergo, there's a greater time for those individuals to turn into that station. We could do that at Neath. We could do that at Talbot. We could do that in Swansea stations. Whether members would want to go down that route is something clearly for the authority to decide, as the legal entity that determines what direction we take. There are minimal options left to us now. We are pretty lean as an organisation. We had a service review some 7 years ago, 2015, 2016, which identified that we are as lean operationally as we possibly could be. And the decline in our on-call availability brings me real areas of concern that we're not even, in some areas, providing a service to the communities that we serve. Like anything, yes, we could go back and trim here and there to make significant savings. I just don't think it's within our gift, I'm afraid. I don't know if Sarah's got anything else to add on that.
Like Roger said, predominantly our budget, 75% is spent on salaries. And what we're finding with our frontline resilience is due to the increasing training commitments that our whole-time firefighters are having to put in, that we're actually having to go to resort to overtime to actually be able to enable our firefighters to be fully trained. So one of the proposals that we need to address in our whole time is to bring in more staff, more firefighters, to enable everybody to be trained appropriately and to have full competency. With regard to the on-call, you saw it there, it was very stark. We are struggling to get fire appliances out of the door. And it's because the remuneration that we offer is not enough to attract people to the fire service. We need to look at how we can attract people in the first place. We need to look at different types of contracts. And if we could get more people in through the door, how we can actually retain our retained firefighters. And I think we're not going to be able to do that unless we can offer a more attractive package. So unfortunately, whilst I would like to be able to sit here and say, yes, we can look at X, Y, and Z and we can cut, I've looked long and hard at this budget. I've looked at the pressures that we're facing. They're not just today, and I know they are faced by everybody. But unless we do take drastic action, as Roger said, and look to actually close stations, then I cannot see a way that we can make efficiencies at this point in time. Thank you.
Just to come back on one further issue, we are, I would guess, most in public services demand-led. We are risk-led. We whether you use us once or 10, 15 times, we are very much a risk-based organisation, so a slightly different model. So try not to conflate the two. The other issue is as well, we are 24/7 operations. So, you know, if you're employing people within council areas of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, we have to provide that availability around the clock in terms of assuring operational response. So it is difficult, and I appreciate most of your business is perhaps a different model. This is starkly different in lots of ways. So conflating the two is often not a helpful exercise as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Simon Noyle, do you want to come back on that?
Thank you. Yes, and you answered my question as I asked, which leads me on to my next part, actually, because I didn't want to mention this, but we are in a very difficult period in history, which is unprecedented. I hate that word, but I had to say it. But in terms of what you've answered, mitigating the increases, you've answered that. Thank you. Where are we with any representations you're making to Welsh Government for additional funding? We're doing all that we can in terms of Welsh Government and UK Government. We're lobbying. We have a petition. We're working with our trade union partners. We have, I believe, I would be correct in saying we have a whole council approach to this. This is a situation which is not unique to us. All local authorities are in the same situation, and our colleagues in England as well. And I think we have to have a joined up partnering approach to lobbying Welsh Government and the UK Government for additional funding. The majority of your increases are related to pay awards. We're seeing pay awards in relation to education and social services as well, as you're aware. And at present, we've been told there is no additional funding available from Welsh Government, which obviously comes down the line from UK Government. So where are you with your representations to Welsh Government or UK Government? And can you update us on that, please? Thank you.
Certainly, excellent question. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, we are also members of the WLGA. We are represented there, and we do lobby into Welsh Government. Welsh Government's standard response is that's what the levy is for. Not helpful in this scenario. I appreciate that. That's what the levy is for. I have met the Deputy Minister, Hannah Blethyn is our Minister with the portfolio for fire and the social partnership. I met Hannah Blethyn on 2 occasions, and both times I've raised with her the concern around on-call availability. So she's fully aware of that. A similar narrative would be played out in North Wales, Fire and Rescue Service, less so in the South Wales area. And I know we have Councillor Jordan here who formerly worked for South Wales Fire. A different model of remuneration for on-call it's a salary scheme within South Wales. It's extremely expensive. Spoke to Hugh Jakeway, Chief of Fire Rescue, Chief Fire Officer within South Wales a couple of weeks ago. Their on-call availability scheme costs them some £7 million a year. And that's not somewhere I want to go or could go. So your answer to your question is, yes, we do speak directly to the Minister. In some ways, when I speak to colleagues on the NFCC, the National Fire Chiefs Council in England, they are jealous of the fact that I can actually get to the Minister and put it right in front of her, which I do on every opportunity. I can absolutely assure you of that. The only hope that I can get is for us both together in a sort of pincer movement is to have some sort of improvement at RSG, which will trickle down into us as well. But rest assured, Councillor, thank you for the question. I can assure you we are doing everything we can through the WLGA, direct to Minister, and any other lobbying opportunities we've got, that standard answer comes back of that's what the levy is for, that's what the combination order is for. Not helpful, but a truism, I'm afraid.
Thanks for that answer. Councillor Rob Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions, if you don't mind, Roger. What effect does the long-running pay dispute, which was taking place over many years before there was a settlement, had on your budgets? So that is one. New technology as well with the all-emergency service, radio technology, that still hasn't been introduced. That is something else that's going to come forward in relation to further additional costs to the service. You used to have a business arm running. Is that still operational, and what is that generating to offset Councillor Noyle's question about trying to enhance your budget by income generation? And the final point on the figures that you based between a 9 and a 13%, that would mean an increase, if my figures are right, of anything between 46p and 63p per month added on to a taxpayer's bill. The figures will be slightly skewed because of council tax benefit for those that don't pay. So to say it's per household or per person could be affected. So those figures may in reality be slightly higher because you've taken the population across the board and perhaps not taken into account those that don't or can't pay council tax. So the three questions there: the long running dispute, the business arm, new IT, and how that will affect costs. There we are.
Thanks to you, Councillor Jones, and good to see you again. We spent a long afternoon on the Public Services Board some years ago. So yeah, I'll take those questions in order. First of all, the industrial action. Some of you may remember some 2 decades ago, around 2002, 2003, around pay. I will say there was a 3-year settlement agreed at that time. I'm going to say, probably look at Councillor Jordan to help me out. There was probably around about 13, 14% over 3 years, I think. Something like a 5, 4 and a 4%. If you recall, the campaign at the time was for 30k. Firefighters who work 30k a year. That was the strap line. That was everything that was pushed on. Some 20 years on, a whole-time firefighter is paid about £31,000 a year. So they didn't get it then. And whilst there were small increases in pay over a 3-year period, I do sense, and this is again my professional judgment, that would have probably happened anyway. I don't really sense there was any significant uplift other than perhaps the first year where there was a 5% increase. So that long-running, painful dispute, I don't feel really advanced the cause of firefighters' pay significantly. I met with the mayor just before, and I mentioned I've done some shifts on stations recently, gone out, sat with crews, tried to connect again with the front line and get to know people. A lot of churn, a lot of changes in the last few years. I went to Neath Fire Station and was confronted with one watcher says, "Did you pass the sign on the way in?" And I said, "What was that?" DPD drivers, £34,000 a year. And that's the world we're in, you know. It's about value and affordability, isn't it? How much do we value these individuals? But there is a balance between, we do value them, but there's an affordability element to that as well, and I appreciate that. So we are up against private companies paying a lot more and better terms and conditions in some cases as well. So we haven't really moved on from that. We are now in the middle of a potential industrial dispute. The firefighters have been offered 5%. They've rejected that. They offered 2, offered 5, rejected. They're now in a consultative ballot to see if there's going to be future strike action, along with a number of public sector unions as well. So we are in a difficult world, and conversations going on now about a 2% cap on public sector pay for next year. I think will further inflame the situation in that they will try and possibly get some more for this year, knowing that there may not be anything down the line in future years. So that's the industrial action element of it. You mentioned about the replacement for airwave. So for those of you not aware, airwave is a multi-channel communication system available for all emergency services and agencies like the Coast Guard and military as well. And it's way in which when we go to multi-agency major incidents, we can all communicate on the same frequency. And I'll talk now. It was one of the criticisms that came out of the 7/7 bombings that emergency services mobilized to a similar location, but didn't communicate with each other. We've seen the news. There's a similar criticism of the Manchester Arena. So where we've come in 15 years is disappointing. We are conducting a gap analysis now to ensure that should that event happen with us, that we would not be in that place. Wales is a smaller country. We are more connected from a network and a relationship perspective, and I would hope we're in a much better position to ensure that our emergency services are more joined up. But that piece of work is ongoing at the moment. So anyway, the replacement for Airwave, which is coming to the end of its usable life now, is a system called ESN, Emergency Services Network. It is going to provide not only voice, but data as well over a channel as well. It is extremely costly. It has been delayed for many years. The latest we hear is going to be something 25, 26, and that's some 3-4 years hence. I'm not sure whether those targets are going to be hit either. In terms of the current funding we get for Airwave, and that's the current system we're using, which will be discontinued in some years to be determined. And this is one of the challenges. It goes back to Councillor's comment about funding from Welsh Government. We currently have some £592,000 grant from Welsh Government to support that Airwave funding. That has flatlined for some 12 years, whilst the costs have gone up exponentially. Sarah will tell me exactly what we pay out every year in terms of the Airwave grant. I think it's about £1 million. Yeah, so we're about £400,000 short, which has to come out of the levy, effectively, because Welsh Government have not index linked that funding. We have some monies put aside in reserves for RESN in the future. However, it's going to be quite considerable. We know that. There's also going to be an element of parallel running. You don't just switch one thing off and turn one thing on. There's going to be an element of double hit for us for a period as well. So those costs are significant. We have no guarantee as well of the future sustainability of that funding. Whilst it's nearly £600,000 a year, we have no guarantee that that will continue. We wait and see. Every year we bated breath really with Welsh Government to see if they will pass that on to us. And the third question was around the business arm. When my predecessor took post in 2014, he established Rescue 365, which was a arm's length building, a trading arm, which was intended at that time to employ individuals in an arm's length community interest company to try and assist with funding into the fire and rescue service. I don't mean this to sound in any way critical. That was not a success. It did not take hold as we'd hoped it would have. One of the areas that we had hoped for was for Tata Steel to come on board for us to provide training in and around their response. That was not forthcoming. And the remainder of the courses that we offered out there just were not taken up to the same degree. So we had to shut that down, unfortunately. And quite honestly, I don't see us resurrecting that. I just don't think that the market is out there to support that for the effort that's involved in it. I want to be prudent in terms of spending public money, and I want to ensure that the money goes back into the fire and rescue service in the first instance. That's my primary concern. Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you for that, Chief Fire Officer. Do you have anything to add to your presentation? No. In that case, I'd like to ask the Deputy Leader, Councillor Alan Llewellyn, to come in.
Diolch, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Hoffwn i ddiolch i Roger a Sarah am ymuno gyda ni pnawn yma, a hefyd cymryd y cyfle i longyfarch Roger ar ei benodiad fel Prif Swyddog Tân. I'd like to thank Roger and Sarah for joining us this afternoon, and personally congratulate Roger on his well-deserved appointment as Chief Fire Officer. I always valued Roger's experience and advice when I was a member of the Fire and Rescue Service, and now also as Cabinet Member for Community Safety as well as Housing. And once again this year, this meeting has, I think, been so valuable in a mutual understanding of the work of the Fire and Rescue Service, and also the role of ourselves as the local authority for Neath Talbot. And of course, we've been able to show our appreciation this afternoon of the role of the Fire and Rescue Service in preventing and tackling fires, but more broadly, the other responsibilities as a rescue service, which we have also seen many aspects of in our area, but very particularly during the past week in tackling the flooding, especially in the Millen area that we all saw, and that we all felt so concerned for those communities that were affected. Now, inevitably, there have been references this afternoon to the financial situation. I think that's inevitable in the current climate, and I'm sure that our Neath Talbot representatives on the Fire and Rescue Authority will be continuing those discussions during the budget setting within the authority, and that all the points that have been raised this afternoon by the Cabinet Member and other members will be taken on board. But I think that also spotlights something that many people are unaware of, that Neath Talbot, along with our neighbouring authorities in Mid and West Wales, do fund the Fire and Rescue Service. That's not always widely known. And I think that, perhaps on a slightly lighter note, if as members we're asked, well, what does the council do? I think as well as pointing to education, social services, street care, leisure, environmental health, you can point for Big Red Fire Engine. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that we remain proud of our partnership and our relationship between the local authority and the Fire and Rescue Authority as well.
Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. If I can bring in Councillor Matthew Crowley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to echo some support and thanks to Mid and West Fire Authority. I am the longest serving elected Neath Talbot Council member on the Mid and West Fire Authority and leader of the Labour group at the authority, Mid and West Fire. I've seen the changes when I came there in 2017. We had Rescue 365 that Roger alluded to, and I was made company director and quickly shut it down because of the money that was pouring out of it. So when Simon asked the question about, what are we doing to save monies, etc., I can tell you wholeheartedly that the Fire Authority are doing the best they can at every point in the game. And it's, as you already, Roger, have said, we've had 3 budget days already, and we get into a point of where we are. And as he said, it was 18%, but it's down perhaps to 9 to 13, whatever it'll be at the end of the settlement. However, I would like to say Roger is correctly, and he's rightly said it, we can close fire stations. We've all been through it. We close schools. It's very difficult. We cannot afford to shut Neath or Port Talbot because they protect coma sites. Port Talbot protects British Steel or Tata Steel, and of course the Neath serves the BOC, which is another coma site. These are critical in the Mid and Fire West response for our constituents. For me personally, I'm proud to be a part of Mid and West Fire Authority. I'd be delighted to be on it for such a long time, and I'll continue to stay as long as I can. The people there are first class, first rate. They're the best of the pick, best of the bunch, and without a shadow of a doubt, when we come to our budget setting, we have to look at, we'll have to dig deep in order to try and protect the costs of the fire service. We do it with ourselves. We've done it recently with our leisure services department. We've brought it back in-house at a great cost. But like everything else, whenever we look at the floodings, our new leader just said it earlier in his opening speech. He mentioned the floodings in Neath last week. Who were the first people there? the fire service. Even the police take a step back now. I'm sorry, Mike Harvey, to say that one, but at the end of the day, the fire service is the A responder. So I would urge all members, and for those of you who there's 2 newly elected on the coalition, from the coalition now to the Mid and West, but I hope all the members take an interest in what Roger have said today, and ask questions of the 4 elected members on it. If you want to talk to me at any point in time, I'm happy to do that. But I would just urge you all with an air of caution when we make decisions around the Mid and West Fire Authority. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that, Councillor Crowley. Councillor Rebecca Phillips.
Diolch Fad a diolch Roger am y cyflwyniad. As well as being on call to deal with emergencies, firefighters undertake valuable work in our communities, including installing fire alarms for the vulnerable and engagement with schools. I just wanted to pass on my personal thanks to the crew at Pontardawe Fire Station, who recently invited the under-7s Rose football team children to the station, where they had a tour and learned a lot about the equipment and kit. I'd be very grateful if you could take that back to the crew at Pontardawe Fire Station. And following previous councillors' comments, just to say that we can't afford to close Pontardawe Station either. Thank you. Diolch.
Many thanks for that, Councillor Phillips, and many thanks indeed for the insightful presentation. Thank you, Council, and thank you to the Chief Fire Officer and Section 151 Officer, Sarah Mansbridge, for your attendance today. Please feel free to take your leave before we move on to the remaining business of Council. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, Council, moving on with the agenda. Agenda item 6, Neath Talbot Youth Justice and Early Intervention Plan. I call upon Councillor Sian Harris, Cabinet Member for Children's Services, to introduce the report.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to introduce the Neath Talbot Annual Youth Justice Plan for 2022-2023. As an authority, along with all other local authorities, we have a statutory duty to submit an annual youth justice plan relating to the provision of youth justice services under Section 40 of the Crime and Disorder Act 1998. The plan sets out how the multi-agency partnership of Neath Talbot Youth Justice Management Board and the Youth Justice Service will fund and deliver services to prevent young people from being involved in crime and violence, and to support those in the criminal justice system to reduce the risk of reoffending. This year, the plan had 19 key points that had to be reported on, and this was a new direction by the board to ensure consistency in reporting nationally. The plan reflects on and reviews performance and developments over the previous year and plans for the year ahead. It will respond to new legislation, demographic changes, and any developments in service delivery. It describes how quality services will be provided to ensure positive outcomes for young people and improvements across performance indicators. The plan reflects on the positive progress that the service has made over the last 2 years. Due to all the hard work by our director, officers, and all staff involved, it has been evidence that our youth justice service has demonstrated resilience, consistent and continued improvement, high quality interventions, excellent organisational delivery, and outstanding governance and leadership. The Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation, HMIP, and the Joint Inspection of Child Protection Arrangements, JICPA, have recognised the progress made, and in a short time, we have moved from the lowest rating to where it sits today, which is good, and during a pandemic. The plan makes clear the service priorities moving forward to ensure that it continues to respond to local trends and national priorities. This will include ensuring a child-focused youth justice service that is developmentally informed, acknowledges structural barriers and meets responsibilities towards children, that it is constructive and future-focused, encourages active participation and promotes a childhood removed from the justice system using preemptive prevention, diversion and minimal intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Member. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your hand to indicate via the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn. I see no questions. I now refer Council to the recommendations on page 24 of the circulated report and the integrated impact assessment, which was circulated to Council as a supplementary pack yesterday afternoon. Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Thank you.
I'm happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Leader. Council, if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Mr. Mayor, so that item has been approved.
Thank you, Jane. Agenda item 7, Corporate Plan Annual Report 2021 to 22. I will call upon the Leader of Council, Councillor Hunt, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members, I'm delighted this afternoon to introduce this corporate plan shaping MPT annual report for the 1st of April 2021 to March 31st, 2022. Mr. Mayor, this report provides a summary of the progress made in delivering the 3 wellbeing objectives approved by the previous administration in 2017. Those 3 wellbeing objectives were to improve the well-being of children and young people, 2, to improve the well-being of all adults who live in the county borough, and 3, to develop the local economy and environment so that the well-being of people can be improved. This is the final time we will report progress on those well-being objectives, as a new set of well-being objectives were approved by Council earlier this year, following the extensive Let's Talk engagement and consultation exercise. Those new wellbeing objectives are contained within the Council's current corporate plan, Recover, Reset and Renew. If we look back on 2021 to 2022, we began the year still in response mode to the ongoing pandemic. However, our response was greatly assisted by the availability of the COVID-19 vaccines. We supported the NHS by converting facilities at Margam Orangery for use as a mass vaccination centre. We also continued to administer government financial support programmes, enabling financial support to be provided quickly to local businesses and local residents. Alongside this ongoing response to the pandemic, we continue to deliver the priorities we had set ourselves to achieve those 3 wellbeing objectives. If we look back on 2021 and 2022, I am pleased to say, Mr. Mayor, that during that period, we remained on track in delivering each of the 3 wellbeing objectives. For example, we continued our regeneration plans across the county borough, including the Neath Town Centre, the Plaza Cinema refurbishment, and the conditional planning consent given for £150 million Global Centre for Rail Excellence at the top of the Dilys Valley and South Powys. We continued to support the early years and child provision and provided additional support throughout the pandemic. From April 2021 to the end of January 2022, our welfare rights unit supported more than 2,000 people, raising more than £5 million in extra income for those clients. That represents an average of £2,500 per person. We issued 2 winter fuel payments of £100 each to over 10,000 residents, and we processed self-isolation payments of either £500 or £750 to over 5,000 residents. In terms of the performance of our services, examples of improved performance during the year included more year 11 pupils studying Welsh first language, the percentage of child assessment completed in time, an increase in apprenticeships within the council, quicker processing of benefits, more council services available online, and further improvements in conditions of A, B and C roads, and an increase in employability programme outcomes, including workways, communities for work, age groups 16 to 24, and communities for work plus. If we continue to look back, we also achieved or exceeded targets for a range of measures, including recycling rates, cleanliness of our streets, food establishment meeting food hygiene standards, the number of households successfully prevented from becoming homeless, and the creation of safeguarding of 410 jobs as a result of financial support provided by this council. Mr. Mayor, I've highlighted only some of our progress towards our wellbeing objectives during the year 2021 to 2022. There's a lot more detail on the annual report. If members haven't already read it, I urge them to read that report. To conclude, Mr. Mayor, the last year was again challenging. The efforts across both the council and our communities across the county borough could continue to be extraordinary to sustain critical services and to support those most at risk. However, I am confident that by working together, we will help the county borough to continue to recover. Yes, there are a number of challenges facing us, but we learned through the pandemic that when we come together, we can achieve remarkable things. On this note, Mr. Mayor, I will conclude by asking Council to formally endorse the recommendations approved by the Cabinet meeting on the 19th of October, which are set out on page 73 of the report in Council today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that, Leader. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your hand or indicate via the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
I can see no hands raised, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that, Jane. I now refer Council to the recommendation on page 73 of the circulated report. Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
I'm happy to move that proposal, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, please to second, Mr. Mayor.
Council, if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your hand, it will be assumed that you were in favour of the recommendations.
I see no hands raised, Mr. Mayor, so that item has been approved.
Thank you, Jane. Agenda item 8, changes to political proportionality and committee membership. I call upon Craig Griffiths, Head of Legal and Democratic Services, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So just one minor change for members to consider today. It would be the replacement of Councillor Suzanne Patterson with Councillor Andrew DC as the local member of the ATC Talbot 499 Squadron. So happy to take any questions on that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Craig. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your hand or indicate via the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
I can see no indications, no hands raised for questions, Mr. Mayor.
I now refer Council to the recommendation on page 228 of the circulated report. Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
Happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, please to second.
Thank you. Council, if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your hand, it will be assumed that you were in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Mr. Mayor. That item has been approved.
Thank you, Jane. Agenda item 9, authority to recruit to the post of Corporate Director, Strategy and Corporate Services. I call upon the Chief Executive, Karen Jones, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully the report is straightforward, so I haven't got anything else to add by way of introduction, but obviously if there are questions, I'm more than happy to respond.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your hand or indicate via the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
I can see no hands raised, Mr. Mayor. There's no questions.
I now refer Council to the recommendation on page 233 of the circulated report. Could I have a proposer and a seconder?
Happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, please to second.
Council, if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations. Thank you, Jane. Agenda item 10, 2023 review of parliamentary constituencies, revised proposals. I will now call upon the officer Rhys George to give a report on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report before members provides an overview of the revised proposals from the Boundary Commission for Wales in relation to its review of the electoral arrangements for the current parliamentary constituencies of Aberavon and Neath. To provide members with some background, the Commission is an independent public body responsible for reviewing parliamentary constituency boundaries throughout Wales. It is the Commission's task to periodically review all Welsh parliamentary constituencies, currently on an 8-year cycle, with the current review having commenced in January 2021. The rules as set by the UK government involve a significant reduction in the number of MPs in Wales, reducing from 40 down to 32, and requires all 650 constituencies across the country to comply with set rules in terms of the number of electors in each. Foremost among those is Rule 2, which provides that apart from a few protected island constituencies, every constituency must have an electorate that is no less than 95% and no more than 105% of the UK electoral quota. The current quota for the 2023 review is 73,393. On this basis, every constituency in Wales must have an electorate that is essentially no smaller than 69,000 and no larger than 77,000 electors. Rule 5 also provides for a number of other factors that the Commission may take into account in establishing a new map of constituencies, including such issues as geographic considerations, local ties, and boundary inconveniences caused by any changes as far as possible. But these are all subject to the supremacy of the electorate range under Rule 2. In September 2021, the Commission published its initial proposals, followed by an 8-week consultation concluding in November 21. In light of the representations received to its initial proposals, the Commission did make some revisions. These were recently published on the 19th of October this year and are as detailed in the report before you, along with the attached appendices. Essentially, the electoral wards within Neath Talbot have been segmented to create 3 parliamentary constituencies. These are Aberavon, Porthcawl, Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawi, Neath and Swansea East. In response to the Commission's request for comments regarding their proposals, the following points of principle, as previously made by Council, have been reiterated. It is clear that the revised proposals, which are almost identical to the Commission's initial proposals, with certain amendments including those to the 3 Coed Franc electoral wards, continue not to take proper account of natural communities, actual local ties, and easily identifiable boundaries. The Commission has given absolute primacy to achieving the statutory electoral range at the expense of all other matters. In essence, the Commission, due to the constraints placed on them, have undertaken a simple arithmetic exercise, rearranging the electoral ward building blocks to achieve the desired result, with little regard to the quality of local governance and creating constituencies which are no longer easily identifiable. While there remains no perfect solution, the returning officer concurs with the view of the Assistant Commissioners in their separate and independent report in trying to determine a configuration that better reflects the communities concerned. The Assistant Commissioners believe strongly that all of the social, economic, community and administrative ties of the Pontardawe, Aman and Upper Swansea Valley areas are and always have been linked with the Neath Swansea conurbation and in their view, its conclusion with a Powys-based constituency meets few, if any, of the statutory factors. In addition, they also had particular reservations and noted the numerous objections to the joining of Swansea East and Neath, particularly from the Llansamlet electoral ward, where there were strong arguments that this community faces Swansea, not Neath, in terms of historical, economic and transport links. On this basis, the Assistant Commissioner favoured a hybrid model of sorts made up on an east-west design north of the city of Swansea, essentially along the M4 motorway. This design is not without precedent and bears close similarity to the area of the former Clew Valley Borough Council, which existed from 1974 to 1996. The name of their proposed constituency for that area would be Clew Valley. In addition, based on this hybrid model, the remaining wards of the Neath and Aberavon constituencies would form a new constituency. This would be made up of Neath Town, the existing Aberavon constituency in large part, and the Maesteg East and West electoral wards, plus Caira from the Bridgend County Borough, due to the transport, community and other links between the Avon Valley and Maesteg. The proposed name for this constituency would be Neath, Aberavon and Maesteg. Members, in conclusion, the Commission's proposals should be for change which is desirable, effective and convenient for local communities. The proposals as they stand will diminish the effectiveness of elected representation, be inconvenient for the electorate and increase the complexity and risk of administrative error in the running of elections. For these reasons, the Returning Officer agrees with the considered position and proposals as adopted by the Assistant Commissioners and detailed in their independent report, and urges the Commission to reconsider its position in rejecting this alternative scheme. In a similar manner to the initial proposals consultation, it remains as important as ever that elected members submit their own views to the Commission to ensure their voices are heard, and to encourage their political groups, constituents and local organisations to do likewise, so that the Commission can determine its final recommendations in the light of the most informed public comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendations, I believe, are on page 260.
Thank you for that, Rhys. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your hand or indicate via the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
I can see no hands raised, Mr. Mayor. There's no questions.
I now refer Council to the recommendations on page 260 of the circulated report, which are to note the contents of the report, so no decision is required at Council today. Agenda item 11, MPT CBC Standards Committees, appointment of independent members. I call upon Craig Griffiths, Head of Legal and Democratic Services, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So an advisory panel met on the 31st of October to interview candidates for our 2 vacancies for lay members for our Standards Committee. We interviewed 3 candidates, and members of that panel are happy to put forward 1 name to Council for confirmation today, that of Professor Duncan Lewis. We do have 1 additional vacancy then to recruit to, so we'll be starting a recruitment process again with the aim of bringing a report back to Council in due course with a further name for a recommendation. So happy to answer any questions on that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that report, Craig. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your hand or indicate via the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
I can see no hands raised, Mr. Mayor. There's no questions.
I now refer Council to the recommendations on page 276 of the circulated report. Could I have a proposer and a seconder?
Happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, please to second.
Thank you for that. Council, if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Mr. Mayor, so that item has been approved.
Thank you, Jane. Agenda item 12, notice of motion under section 10 of part 4, rules of procedure. I have received no motions for today's meeting. Agenda item 8. Questions from members with notice under Rule 9.2 of the Council's procedure rules. I have received no questions for today's meeting. Agenda item 9, urgent items. I have no urgent items. That ends the business for today's meeting. Thank you all for attending and safe journey home.